On May 25th, 2019, All Elite Wrestling staged its inaugural event, Double or Nothing. The 11,000 fans in Las Vegas's MGM Grand Garden Arena and the more than 100,000 households that had purchased the event on pay-per-view witnessed an ambitious first showing from the budding promotional powerhouse. Following 4 hours of high-quality matches featuring an eclectic mix of indie standouts, cult favorites, and proven headline stars, the story of the night was saved for the final page. As Chris Jericho demanded reverence from the Vegas crowd post-main event, the chorus of boos began giving way to a sliver of frenzied cheers. Suddenly, the cameras picked up Jon Moxley, pushing his way through the sea of humanity and making a beeline toward the ring. 4 months earlier, Moxley was still Dean Ambrose, all too recently the Intercontinental Champion of the WWE he'd worked for close to 8 years, a place where he once reigned as its top champion. But the man beneath both gimmick names had grown weary of life in his longtime home, and when met with one frustrating impasse after another, he decided it was time to make a change. The vociferous and unruly Moxley had a sturdy cult following to his name when he signed with WWE in the spring of 2011. The man rechristened Dean Ambrose found a larger audience at the 2012 Survivor Series in Indianapolis, while flanked by Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins. What became apparent was that these 3 men were stars in the making. The 3 members of what became known as the Shield dressed in similar black attire going forward, but each was exceedingly distinct from his brothers. Reigns was the brooding muscle, Rollins the brash daredevil, and Ambrose was the twisted sadist. Each possessed winning qualities in abundance, and that made this trio so compelling. Considered the most charismatic of the 3, Ambrose possessed this magnetic energy, with twists and hitches in his gait and a subconscious contort in his myriad of expressions. Many have likened Ambrose's manic vibes to those of the departed Brian Pillman or even Heath Ledger's Joker, in the sense that each could command attention, even in silent moments. Fans picking up on Dean Ambrose's talents were learning what Jon Moxley fans had known for years. This was the farthest thing from a cookie-cutter wrestler that there was. Ambrose felt like a natural top heel, but when the Shield split up in 2014, he went in the opposite direction. Rollins, a graceful and valiant high flyer in the mold of Shawn Michaels, went the selfish sellout route. Ambrose, the aberrant brute, became a blue-collar brawler with some semblance of a moral compass. While Rollins the face and Ambrose the heel seemed to make more sense in 2014, the way WWE executed the fallout worked well enough. As such, Ambrose's popularity only seemed to increase, and his popularity was rewarded with championships. Across over 6 years on the main roster, Ambrose held 3 Intercontinental titles, 1 US title, 2 tag team titles, and was WWE champion for about 3 months in 2016. There's no doubt that for a good part of the 2010s, Dean Ambrose was booked with higher regard than most of his WWE contemporaries. And yet, Ambrose wasn't exactly satisfied, and he hadn't been satisfied in a long time. Scripted success was just that, scripted, and in Jon Moxley's post-WWE life, he's had a lot to say about WWE and their scripts. The Jon Moxley we see in AEW is something of an understated nihilist, but one with no time for corruption and injustice. To see Moxley is to see the dogged anti-heroism of a Snake Plissken or the street-smart courage of a John McClane, the latter of whom Moxley admitted he'd largely model his ideal character after. To put it mildly, Dean Ambrose and Jon Moxley weren't exactly the same person. Whereas Moxley's means of expression were more straightforward and cutthroat, Ambrose could be a bit more of a random, offbeat, wacky sort of guy. Whether he was toting around a pet potted plant or absent-mindedly almost forgetting the WWE title belt in the back of a taxi, or rigging Rollins' Money in the Bank briefcase with projectile slime, or pushing around a hot dog cart, Ambrose remained a popular character, though rather heavy on the ha-ha comedy. To put it another way, Dean Ambrose was a PG version of Jon Moxley, like when Joe Pesci or Robert De Niro would take a break from Scorsese crime dramas to do kids' movies. And the man behind Ambrose wasn't finding much fulfillment in this role. Oftentimes, Moxley felt Ambrose was designed to be nothing more than a detached, nonplussed eccentric, like the wacky neighbor on an evening sitcom. Ambrose would often confront Vince McMahon over scripted matters, and whenever he took umbrage with any character objectives that he thought were ridiculous or nonsensical, McMahon would apparently try and strongly sell the creative to him, reasoning that it fit his character to a T. The phrase "such good" entered wrestling's lexicon forever following Moxley's appearance on Talk Is Jericho, where the ex-WWE star laid out his many years' worth of frustrations. Because, according to Ambrose, those 3 words were what Vince would describe those creative objectives to him as, in response to the former Shield member taking issues with them. Here, Ambrose felt like he'd partially doomed himself. He'd made silly ideas work before with his effort and execution, and so WWE continued to script silly ideas for him to perform. As Moxley would later detail it, he resented not only the content he was given to work with, but the fact that he wasn't trusted to come up with his own material, something more from the heart. Being handed his verbiage by a writer, especially all of the haha material, seemed to create one Maylox moment after another for the man whose monologues from the indies were vital to the legend. In his own words, Moxley said of his time in WWE, "Promos used to be my favorite part of wrestling. I loved it. It ended up becoming my least favorite part." For most of 2018, Dean Ambrose sat on the shelf recovering from a torn triceps sustained shortly before the previous Christmas. While recovering, he had missed being able to feed off of live crowds. As his return to the WWE drew closer, he craved getting a chance to relish that feeling again. But as he had those thoughts, he admitted a more realistic one crept into his mind. The creative stifling he'd come to expect in WWE, and with it the inability to express himself naturally, was likely to still be there when he came back. He noted, "I was excited to come back to wrestling, but I was not excited to come back to WWE." After coming to grips with his return likely being more of the same, Jon Moxley made the decision to leave WWE at the expiration of his deal in the spring of 2019. For the time being, Moxley kept his intentions close to the vest. After all, there were still 8 or 9 months to go, and anything could change in the meantime. Who's to say things wouldn't turn around? A more muscular, shorter-haired Ambrose returned shortly before that year's SummerSlam, backing up Rollins. The two later joined up with Reigns once more in a full-blown Shield reunion. The trio was set to compete together at Super Showdown in Melbourne that October, which put a temporary delay on a pitch Ambrose personally made to Vince earlier in 2018. A heel turn. Wanting to do something, anything, unlike his previous few years on WWE television, a still recovering Ambrose met with McMahon and suggested turning himself bad. The Shield reunion was going to happen first, but Ambrose ultimately did get his wish. And it was all sorts of screwed up. The night of October 22nd, 2018 proved to be an unforgettable one in the annals of WWE history. Roman Reigns, then the Universal Champion, announced to the world that he'd had a recurrence of leukemia and was off to fight his illness. After abdicating the title in an emotional segment, Reigns was embraced by Rollins and Ambrose. And so it was a curious decision, to say the least, to have Ambrose turn on Rollins close to 3 hours later, as fans were still coming to grips with Reigns' upsetting announcement. And given that Ambrose and Rollins had just won the tag team titles minutes before their turn. It took weeks for Ambrose to offer an explanation for the startling double cross. When he did, he claimed that it was because the Shield made him weaker and that Rollins had treated him like a joke. With that, he burned his Shield vest in a flaming barrel. The promo itself was pretty effective and spelled out Ambrose's angst well enough. With that sort of animosity lingering heavily in the air, the stage was set for an intense rivalry among former friends. 1 week after the vest burning, Raw emanated from Los Angeles, the night after the 2018 Survivor Series. With the multi-brand warfare now tucked away for the year, Ambrose and Rollins could continue their feud proper. If only. For reasons that aren't exactly clear, and may never be clear even with the best possible explanation, Dean Ambrose received a character retooling. Instead of just being a pissed-off brawler with an axe to grind, Ambrose was all of a sudden an easily repulsed germaphobe that debased the audience for being odorous and disgusting. Rather than solely focus on the festering bitterness he had toward his old friend, Ambrose was supposed to gripe about the smelly audience in LA in multiple segments. At one juncture, in his final promo of a busy night, Ambrose was supposed to make reference to a pooper scooper. Mortified, Ambrose worked with creative to come up with a less humiliating promo, praying that it would get Vince's approval. The hope was that Vince could approve that script and not see the one with the pooper scooper, figuring the boss would see the scooper reference as, well, as such good you-know-what. Ambrose spent the bulk of that afternoon doing different promos for different pre-tapes, all the while crossing his fingers that he'd gain approval for a more satisfying in-ring promo. What Ambrose apparently got was a written directive from Vince himself, reiterating that insulting the audience was paramount. The directive also said that Ambrose needed to read his promos as they were written, without trying to change them. Ambrose also questioned a cruel remark written about real-life friend Roman Reigns' leukemia battle, in which he would refer to it as karma. Vince apparently explained away the remark as needing to include the absent Reigns in the story, since Ambrose had functionally turned on him as well. Ambrose, who admitted to being strained by all of the hoop jumping and filming throughout the afternoon, did the line as directed and remembers feeling disgusted as soon as he uttered it. If there was one positive to the exhausting, mentally draining day, it was that Ambrose's non-pooper scooper promo was approved. Problem was, the newer script initially made reference to Ambrose saying that he'd need a gas mask to deal with the crowd's stench. Because a prop was mentioned on a WWE creative document, this meant eventually Ambrose would, well, you've seen him wear it. As Moxley recalls, that was the day he began literally counting down on his phone's calendar the days until his WWE contract expired. And after Raw the following week, he knew for sure that once his deal ran out, he wasn't coming back. This was the infamous Raw in Milwaukee, in which Ambrose did a pre-tape at a doctor's office. To explain the suddenly germophobic Ambrose not being in the arena, he was filmed receiving an on-camera inoculation to protect him from the diseased denizens of Milwaukee. According to Ambrose, Vince felt that this segment would actually generate heat for his feud with Rollins. What would have generated heat was a line allegedly given to Ambrose that he flat out refused to say. On the heels of the karma line directed toward Reigns, Ambrose was given another apparently horrific remark to say about his real-life friend. The exact line is not known because Ambrose refused to say it, even on a podcast many months later. He believes that had he uttered it on TV, somebody could have lost their job and WWE sponsors would have been up in arms, so use your imagination. In this case, McMahon acquiesced to Ambrose's refusal, but to the former Shield member, it was just another example of the two being on radically different pages when it came to how Dean Ambrose should be portrayed creatively. Whether it was wacky comedy or ham-fisted attempts at garnering heat, the two did not see eye to eye. And after that November 26, 2018 edition of Raw, Ambrose was committed to becoming Jon Moxley again. A brief run as Intercontinental Champion bled over into 2019, but it didn't change anything. Come the weekend of the Royal Rumble, when then Talent Relations Director Mark Carrano tried to broach a contract extension, Ambrose balked. He then verbalized his intention to leave WWE at the end of April. Reportedly, the deal Moxley rejected was worth just north of $1 million a year for 5 years. On the Tuesday following the Rumble, Pro Wrestling Torch reported that Ambrose had given his notice. WWE issued a press release later in the day, confirming that Ambrose was not going to re-sign and that they wished him well in his future days. The fact that WWE put out this press release led many skeptics, including myself, admittedly, to believe it was all a work. But it wasn't. Ambrose was leaving, and WWE scored a few points in the gracious department for their statement. What seemed less gracious was the initial booking direction for Moxley going forward. The day before news of his notice broke, Ambrose lost cleanly to Rollins in the Monday Night Raw opener, which isn't all that malicious. Wrestlers lose on the way out all the time. Moments later though, while he was still in the ring, Ambrose had an altercation with Nia Jax, which resulted in Jax knocking him down. According to Ambrose, he learned of that spot 1 hour before Raw went on the air, and that it was the result of a late rewrite. With word of his leaving making it to the upper echelon of WWE, Ambrose saw this as an attempt at burial. After learning of the rewrite, he confronted McMahon that night before showtime. McMahon allegedly claimed he had no idea that Ambrose hated all of those goofy angles he was in, despite Moxley claiming he'd expressed his objections to McMahon personally on many occasions. He also claims that Vince tried to pass off Nia taking him down as building to a special attraction, and that they weren't burying him on the way out. Indeed, Ambrose vs. Jax was locally advertised for a February house show in Jonesboro, Arkansas. While Nia did get physical in the men's Royal Rumble that January weekend, man versus woman matches just didn't happen in 2019 WWE, nor had they happened for many years, so this sudden need for Vince's idea of a special attraction was indeed a curious one. Little more than a week after that in-ring confrontation, however, the match between Ambrose and Jax was cancelled. There was a very real sense that the fans weren't going to allow Ambrose to be thoroughly buried. In a world where a new national promotion was about to debut, one with a foundational fan base of die-hard fans that follow news and rumours, perhaps WWE realised they shouldn't be making themselves look like the bad guy in this situation. Ambrose went on to lose to Raw newcomer EC3 in under 3 minutes the following week. Again, putting over others on the way out doesn't equate to a burial necessarily, but here many fans saw it differently and began vocalising their support for Ambrose. At the following weekend's house shows in Ontario and Michigan, EC3 continued to go over Ambrose, to which fans fiercely booed. Ambrose seemed to have many supporters that sided with him against WWE, and poor EC3 bore the brunt of fan disdain. Reportedly, McMahon got word of the crowd reactions and was not happy. As a result, the outbound Ambrose actually defeated EC3 the following week in a rematch on Raw. And for poor Ethan Carter III, it was all downhill from there in WWE. Shortly thereafter, Ambrose was hastily turned face and reunited with The Shield, including Reigns now in remission. From here on in WWE, Ambrose lived a double life, getting thoroughly beaten by Drew McIntyre on TV and at live events, while teaming with his Shield mates in feel-good victories. He was left off WrestleMania 35, but Ambrose did wrestle 2 final matches in April. The last one was for a WWE Network special entitled The Shield's Final Chapter, held April 21st in Moline, Illinois. In one last hurrah, the group defeated McIntyre, Baron Corbin, and Bobby Lashley. As a coda to Ambrose's WWE tenure, in an apparent final act of pettiness, Moxley noted that his payoff from WWE for the night was $500, about what an extra would get paid to just hang around backstage. As part of the network special, the 3 men were interviewed by Michael Cole. Anticipating that Cole was going to ask a question that might try to spin his exodus as a show of weakness, Ambrose piped up and said, "8 years ago, I walked into this casino. Now I'm cashing in my chips and I'm walking away from the table. I won the game. What I do with the rest of my life from here on out is my business. I answer to no one. This time, the $1 Million Man didn't get what he wanted because I can't be bought." 5 weeks later, there was Jon Moxley, closing out AEW Double or Nothing, coincidentally while standing on a giant stack of poker chips. Since then, Moxley has made his mark on both All Elite Wrestling and New Japan. He's been an AEW World Champion, he's been IWGP United States Champion. He's also carved out an indie schedule to his own liking, whether it's for Bloodsport outings or a reunion with old nemesis Nick Gage. Moxley-related highlights on AEW's social channels usually draw the most clicks as he remains a viable star, this time on his own terms and speaking in his own words. While his tenure in WWE could have gone a lot better in his eyes, Moxley did express gratitude for a number of positive things. He got to live out a part of his wrestling dream, work with Make-A-Wish, and meet his future wife, Renee. But there remained a sense of unfulfillment, and despite many attempts to satiate his creative sweet spot, he just couldn't beat what he felt was WWE's structural inflexibility. And so, looking to quench his desire elsewhere, Jon Moxley left WWE behind peaceably, Prison Break vignette notwithstanding. While grateful for what WWE did for him professionally and personally, Moxley summed up all his feelings on Jericho's podcast by saying, "The ultimate reward I got from WWE was my freedom."